It was bitterly cold outside. I stood there, shaking, as passersby hurried to their homes and cars. No one cared about a teenager whose head was covered in snow and whose fingers were barely moving. Beep. Move over, someone's car honked. I jumped at the sudden loud sound, and only then did I come to my senses and realize that I was standing right in the middle of the road, staring at the store. Automatically, I rummaged in my pockets for the money. I raked out everything I had. I collected exactly $1. A worthless sum, enough for food and water, and I'll have to hold out for another day or two if I'm lucky. Only yesterday I had everything, and today I have to beg. How sad, I thought. All I wanted to do was buy hot tea and something to eat, but at the last moment, I was stopped before entering the store. It was a homeless uncle. He asked for help, said he needed $1, not enough for food and medicine. I know you don't want to help me, but I do need some medicine, he said. I'm sorry, but I'm homeless myself, I've got my last dollar, and I'm hungry, I told him. And he answered me. I understand, I'm sorry to bother you, I just need some medicine. And then he started coughing a lot, and he was so sick that I was scared. I dragged him into the store but immediately came face to face with the seller. Get out. This is no shelter for you. You don't understand, a man needs help, he's sick, call an ambulance. You don't understand. I'm going to call the police. Get out of here. The angry salesman shouted. Then, disgustedly, he grabbed the mop in his hands and began to push me with it. At this time, the man completely lay down on the ground. I was so confused that I even forgot about hunger. I managed to lay him down on the floor, took off my jacket, crumpled it up, and put it under my head. The salesman kept shouting that if we didn't get out, he would call the police. Call me, come on, call me, a person feels bad, suddenly he dies. I shouted. With round eyes full of anger, I looked at the seller, and he looked at me and at the same time said that this is just a homeless person, and he is not worth it. We're all worth something, I said, and dialed the short number 911. A week earlier. Mom, have you seen my coat? I asked, hurriedly getting ready for school. My mother always called me a slob, and maybe I am. She pointed her finger at the thing right in front of me, and I grabbed it, put it on, and ran to school. I never liked winter, my ears are always freezing from the cold, my hands and feet, and my nose. Is it summer? I was walking to school, and I thought it would be great to get in my car and go, but I crashed it. Yes, there was a case. This is my joint, I just wanted to show off in front of a girl, started drifting and lost control. The ice took its toll. In general, I don't have a scratch on me, but the car I had to put it in for repairs, and it's going to be there for the next few weeks. I will not tell you how I got from my parents. My father thought I was a spoiled child because I had always lived in prosperity. Mom and dad grew up from poor families, and I was born immediately in a rich family. Yes, you're right, I was luckier than they were. But I never thought that I could live in any other way. At school, I liked to bully nerds and other insecure people. I will not hide that money gave me strength, self-confidence and created a mood. I could afford to buy almost everything I wanted. But at the same time, I took it as a given. Wow, who's coming? The king of all parties, Harry. This is how my company greeted me. The guys were also from non-poor families, but I was in charge there, they listened to me, did what I said. And we had one tradition, to abuse children from poor families. I don't know why I liked it, probably because I felt that they were weaker and would not be able to respond. After school, we would pick up any of the victims, and then they would all confer with me about how we were going to abuse them, how we were going to torture them, and so on. I chose Henry that day. During that school year, we bullied him for the 43rd time, and he never complained to anyone. That's what we liked best. So we caught him, dragged him outside the school, soaked him with snow, took off his pants and stuffed ice in his underpants, and then made him dance. I was laughing like I was watching a comedy, and it wasn't until an hour later, when the ice melted, that we let it go. It was almost blue in color. Then one of my guys tried to stop me. Hey, Harry, can we do this? They laughed and that's enough. The guy is already quite cold. Let's let it go. And it made me mad. Do you want to be in his shoes? Take off your pants and stand next to me, I shouted at my friend, but he was scared. And it was like I lost control of myself, called Henry a bum, said that he had no right to live because he was poor, said that I disdained him, and all that sort of thing. The wet and frozen kid ran home when I let him go. I returned home, and it turned out that this time he was not silent, told everything to my mother, and so complained to the director. He called my mother. We had a big fight. I told her not to go anywhere she wasn't asked. If you lived for even a day without money, how would you feel? You won't last a couple of hours, why do you mock the poor boys? You are punished. My mother shouted. I was so angry that I shouted out that I would do without their money. Then I left the house. I had money with me, about $300. I wanted to prove that I could live on my own. But the money quickly ran out. The first 3 days I lived in a hotel, ate in a cafe. On the 4th day I realized that the money was barely enough for food, and for the first time in my life I spent the night at the train station. I couldn't call my friends because I was ashamed. My parents weren't looking for me, I know, they were trying to teach me a lesson. But you know what? That day, when I came to the train station, I saw a lot of people there. I thought they wanted to leave, but they didn't. My grandfather coughed very close to me, and he walked past me, moved his hand in silence, and then said, "Nice coat." At the same moment, I was surrounded by several homeless people. I got scared and took off my coat, barely managing to escape from there. I was so cold that I thought of going home, but I was too far away. The taxis didn't stop, the buses didn't work anymore. I had a long night ahead of me. After a block, I wandered into a courtyard where I saw a bunch of homeless people, but these were different. There were small children sitting on the ground, sharing a piece of bread for 4 and trying to light a fire. At the sight of me, the smallest girl ran up to me and gave me her gloves. After all, this is all she has. Before I could thank her, they had gone somewhere else, and the police were driving by. I hid around the corner, then went outside, felt in my pocket for $1, and wanted to eat. But I saw a sick man who needed help. Just yesterday I would not have helped him, I would have gone about my business, but I felt sorry for him. I saw that there are lives much worse than mine, that is, mine doesn't even compare. I helped the man, called an ambulance, and went with him, posing as a relative. They gave me a blanket, I drank some water, and I fell asleep in the hallway. The familiar voice woke me up. The man I helped, he looked much better. There was a man standing behind him with a camera, and I couldn't understand what was going on. It turned out that I got into a reality show. The man was a fake, he checked passersby for responsiveness. He was a millionaire himself. Well, so I was the winner, and he wrote me a check for $1 million. I couldn't believe it had happened. I called my parents, came home, and we talked. The days on the street taught me a lot. In general, with the proceeds, I am opening a new shelter for the homeless where they will provide free food and a place to stay for the night. I think it's a great idea. What do you think?
Hi everyone, my name is Madison. I want to tell you a story from my life. I just had a moment when your fate depends on one decision, so I had to choose, and not in favor of myself, and it became a real test. In short, now you will understand everything, but in the meantime, listen, watch, and you can ask questions under my story. Do not forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and of course, write your opinion. I'll start with the fact that everything in my family was initially difficult. My mother married a man, my father left us a long time ago, and my mother and I lived together for many years. I grew up and adapted to this life. I even thought it would always be like this. Did I ever think that my mother would ever get married again? Of course not. She worked, I went to school, we rented a small apartment, and in general, everything suited me. So one day she came up to me and asked me what would happen if our lives changed. I didn't immediately understand her question because I hadn't thought so globally yet. I replied that I'd be happy if it changed, only if it was a positive change. Well, my mother said, "Daughter, I met a man and we fell in love." Yes, I protested at first. I didn't want to break out of my comfort zone. I behaved like a real egoist, showed my real character, and even left the house that day. The first thing I did was go to my friend, who is very wise, so I often asked her for advice. I wanted her to support me, to reassure me, but all she said was not to be selfish. Your mother is a young woman, and if she met a decent person, then why not build her own life? You happen to be her daughter and you're underage, so whether you want to or not, you're still going to be a part of her life. And why don't you let her be happier? She told me. Then I realized she was right. My mother did not leave my father. He left us. And now she has met a man with whom, perhaps, she will succeed. Why not? I came home in the evening. My mother was sitting at home all tearful. I said I was sorry, and then I said I didn't mind. She was so happy. Anyway, I met her boyfriend a couple of days later. He seemed to me quite decent, and I was not mistaken. He really won my trust, but the most important thing was that my mother was happy with him. 6 months later, he asked us to move in with him and proposed to my mother. My stepfather had a huge house because he lived with his mother. That lady was not very happy with us. She always wanted her only son to find a younger girl in his years than my mother and without a child. My stepfather immediately warned us not to pay attention to the old woman. She was too grumpy. My mother and I were mentally prepared, but still, it turned out that I did not fully realize what was waiting for me in the bad character of my grandmother. Since my stepfather and mother worked, they were not at home all day, and I came home after school and spent the whole day together with my grandmother. She insisted on calling her Mrs. White. She found fault with everything. I wash my hands with the wrong soap, I eat too much bread, I use too much water, I use up electricity, I don't wash the floors properly, I don't dust properly. At first I was silent about it, and then I began to tell my mom and stepfather, and he had a fight with his mom. It was a nightmare. There was a lot of swearing in the house, and I wanted to get out of there more and more, but I saw how my stepfather supported my mother, stood up for her, protected her, and it was nice. But when I began to ignore her attacks, she switched to attacking my mother. The old woman stayed in the toilet or bathroom for hours. She spoiled the food prepared by my mother, and especially threw her colored things into the laundry along with my mother's white shirts. She used to mess up, like accidentally knocking dishes off the table with food in them, and in the middle of the night, often walked around the house, making noise. My mother was patient. She didn't say anything, but I saw everything. Well, one day I came home from school, and I saw that my grandmother was picking through my mother's things. I asked her not to do it, and she kind of exploded. If it wasn't for you, everything would be fine. You're a real burden. Someone else's child will remain a stranger forever. You are someone else's blood, and you will never be my granddaughter, she shouted, and then went to her room. Her words hurt. Over time, I realized that there was no place for me in this house. If I was not there, she would leave my mother alone and let them live in peace. I seriously thought about her words, and one day, I left home for school and did not return. I asked to see my friend again, just for one night. Candy asked me to stay as long as I wanted, but I had plans to go back home to where my mother and I lived. I managed to save some money, sold my phone, so it should have been enough for the first night. Candy's phone didn't stop ringing all night, but I told her not to pick up because I knew it was my mom. I told my friend that I would rather live on the streets than destroy my family. Maybe then my grandmother would calm down and leave my mother alone. We ate dinner and went to bed, glad Candy's parents weren't home. The next morning, I had breakfast, packed some food, and drove to the bus stop. Sitting at the bus stop, I had a sandwich to eat, and then I heard a siren. It was the police. At the sight of them, I ran in the other direction, and of course, they caught up with me in the car. I was taken to the police station, where my mother arrived in 4 minutes. It was probably the first time I'd ever seen her like this. Red, tear-stained eyes, a haggard face. She was shaking all over, and when she saw me, she fell at my feet and began to hug and kiss me. My stepfather also hugged me tightly. He even cried and asked where I was and what I was doing all this time. I told them everything. My mother hugged me again in horror and told my stepfather that they should break up. I can't risk my daughter's life, I'm sorry, she said. The two of us went to our old apartment. I saw how sad my mother was, but I didn't want to live with my grandmother. But in the evening, my stepfather came to pick us up. He wasn't alone. I'm sorry. The child has nothing to do with it. I didn't know it would be like this, the old woman said. My mother listened to her incredulously for a long time, and she kept apologizing. It turned out that my stepfather refused to marry her friend's daughter, So my grandmother rebelled when he brought my mother and me into the house. But he talked to her and she realized everything. Mom didn't want to go back for a long time until I asked her to. I persuaded my mother to give my grandmother a chance and she agreed. Now we live with her again, and so far everything is normal. She has changed a lot, but I don't know for how long. But I think everyone deserves a second chance. What do you think?